All right, this week's Torah portion, Parshas Shoftim, includes the words an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And, a lot of people say, like, just the common, way people talk in the world is that, you compare what Christians will call the Old Testament and the New Testament. For us, we have an Only Testament, what they call the Old Testament, but that's neither here nor there. It's different religions. We recognize, we think we're right, they think they're right. That's just how the world is. And I don't look to change anybody. However, it's certainly true that people mistakenly say that, and they misrepresent what they call the Old Testament and what they call the New Testament, that the God of the Old Testament is a God of wrath and anger, and the God of the New Testament is a God of love. And the thing is the fact of the matter is, I've read both. I only believe in what they call the Old, personally, but I understand and respect that certain people believe in what they call the New. I just have different belief. And I have reasons why I believe what I believe, but that's neither here nor there. And it's not just because I was born Jewish, because I was also raised in a home where, one of my parents was Jewish, one of my parents was Christian, Catholic, to be particular. What type of Christianity? Didn't really have much of a religious life in either one, although I would say I had some exposure to both religions, but much more exposure to Judaism than to Christianity, to Catholicism. My sisters wound up having probably more exposure to Catholicism than to Judaism. We each had our own approach, our own thing, and our own way. And later on, we learned more about the other in our own way as well. But that's just how it came out, and it's hard to say. I don't know. I heard that. It's the guy who played Maxwell Smart, Don Adams. He had also, his mother was Jewish, his father was Catholic, and they interestingly agreed to raise one child in one religion and one the other. So Don Adams was raised Catholic, and his brother was raised Jewish. Just an interesting piece of trivia. It's kind of a strange thing. But us, more or less chosen our own, and found our own way. That's neither here nor there. But anyway, so it's not that I'm just picking Judaism because I'm Jewish, because alright, just because I was born Jewish doesn't mean that that's why I'm picking it. But that's not what I'm saying here. That's not what I'm arguing here. I'm talking now about, is it unfair to say that the quote-unquote God of the Old Testament is the angry, vengeful God, and the quote-unquote God of the New Testament is the loving God? Now, if you believe in both, you would assume it's the same God, right? Like, what's going on here? What is this all about? Excuse me. So, and they'll point out, look, in the Old Testament it says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's pretty vengeful, it's pretty angry, and a lot of other angry things in this week's Parsha, and in what they call the New Testament, they'll say, look, it says God is love, and they'll say, all of these things about love. But the fact of the matter is, there's just as much, first of all, what they call the Old Testament is a much larger group of books, much larger amount of words than what they call the New Testament, meaning the whole series of books that Christians call the New Testament is smaller, has fewer pages than our Chumash, than our Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. So that's neither here nor there. But the point of the matter is, there are angry statements, there are plenty of loving statements in the Tanakh and in the Hebrew Bible. what Christians call the Old Testament. And most of the beautiful things that you'll find in what Christians call the New Testament come right out of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the Torah, the Chumash, the Nevi'im, the Ksuvim, what they call the Old Testament. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people are just ignorant. Many Jews are ignorant. There's a story of one famous anti-missionary rabbi. He tells a story. There was a girl who he was talking to, a Jewish-born girl, but she didn't have much of a Jewish upbringing, and she said, she's so enamored with Christianity, and the rabbi said, well, what attracts you to Christianity? I'm curious. And she said, well, look at this. They asked Jesus, what are the most important commandments? And he said, love thy neighbor, and you should love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And he said, those are, first of all, from the Jewish Bible, but these words, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, are what we say twice a day. Some people say more than twice a day in our liturgy, in the Jewish liturgy. And just so many Jewish people are so ignorant of Judaism, they don't even know what they're dealing with. I remember I had a meeting once with a Pentecostal preacher, and he was talking about, he went to public school as a kid, and they had some honor society thing, and there was a quote from Proverbs, and it was a Jewish kid. He had to read this, and he asked his friend, who later became a pastor, he said, what are these numbers and the colon and the other numbers? What's that all about? What is this? Why does it say Proverbs, 7:20, whatever it said? I don't remember. I don't know what the verse was, but what do those numbers mean? Meaning, so many Jewish people are just totally ignorant of just basic things of Judaism, to the point where if they just knew, they wouldn't. But the thing is, and other people are also ignorant of just the basics of the Bible, of all kinds of things. I mean, for the most part, I remember there's a book by Houston Smith, the World Religions, and the first thing I did was I opened up and read the part on Judaism, because I want to know, what does he have to say about Judaism? And I was like, this is not the Judaism I really know. This is not my Judaism. This is talking about Judaism more or less as a dead religion with a small amount, which is, what's going on here. It reminded me of my Rebbe from high school, Rabbi Weinberger. He said, he used to read the New York Times every day. He doesn't anymore, but he excuse me. But he said, he knew whatever it's in the New York Times about, he knows about Judaism because he's Jewish, he's a rabbi, and he knows the stuff that they write in there about Jews and Judaism is false. So then his assumption is, when they talk about something he doesn't know, and he talk about Buddhists or Hindus or something, or Sikhs that he doesn't know anything about, that must also be wrong. And that's what Rabbi Weinberger said. And so I thought the same thing. I was like, I'm reading this book, The Religions of the World, and what he says about Judaism is not true, really. Or it's not the Judaism I know and live, and therefore, whatever he has to say about Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever, or Islam, or whatever else he's talking about, must also be wrong. But the difference was, I looked at the book and I realized he treated Judaism differently than he treated these other religions. And he had much more footnotes and everything, or references, the endnotes, the end of the chapter, on all these other religions, and he had almost no notes about sources of Judaism. And it was almost like his approach to Judaism, there was a chapter about, early pagan religions, animistic religions, and things like that. And he's like, and it's almost like he saw Judaism as one of those old dead religions, as opposed to living in vibrant religion, and accept that also they made a state of Israel, whatever, like that was, and they have today, Reform and Conservative and Orthodox and blah 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 and whatever, but like was mostly seeing Judaism as a means to the end of getting Christianity. That's how he mostly saw it, and that's how a lot of people see Judaism as like a vestigial remnant of an old world that has no place in the modern world. That's how many what we would essentially call like replacement theology Christians would see. But even if they're not particularly religious people, they still, people who are not religious still recognize the incredible impact that Christianity has had on the world, and on Western civilization. And so therefore, they might feel that they have to say, so they have to recognize the impact that Christianity had on the world. And the only real impact Judaism as a religion had on the world, as far as they see, is by bringing Christianity, being the root of Christianity. And there's really no other, in the sight of these scholars, these secular scholars and these Christian scholars, that there's no other purpose of Judaism. Now, Jews have had a tremendous impact in the world, but how many of them have had an impact because of Judaism? And how many have had just impact? Maybe they're like vestigial remnants of their Jewishness because they've abandoned their faith, things like that. So what exactly is going on? What are we talking about here? But that's neither here nor there, because the point is, first of all, the way, like Houston Smith, he presented Judaism, he practically ignored the Talmud, the rabbis, all of that, which is of course central to Judaism as a living religion today, for sure. And traditionally, we believe that their teachings are rooted in biblical sources. They're certainly rooted in biblical sources. Nobody can deny the biblical roots of the teachings of the rabbis, because almost every page of the Talmud, or at least every other page or whatever, is quoting the Bible, and the pages that are not quoting on the Bible are just commenting on the Bible. The whole Talmud is commenting on the Bible, explaining the Bible. There's not one page of the Talmud that can't be linked somehow to the Bible. Even the laws of Hanukkah, things that are post-biblical in nature, can still be rooted in Scripture. And I don't mean just in the sense how Christians have added onto the Bible by adding more books that do reference Hanukkah. I'm saying in how Jews recognize the Hebrew Bible, everything can be traced to something in the Bible. So that's but then again, there's all these myths against the Talmud, and all these, little quotes here and there, they're taken out of context and things like that. Now, but again, there's something else I want to discuss here, is how, again, they say that the Old Testament is what they call the Old Testament, that's the angry God, the vengeful God, and what they call the New Testament, that's the God of love and peace and all these things. They also say, the Old Testament is very legalistic and the New Testament is spiritual, and all these different things that people say, being the differences between Judaism and Christianity, and being the differences between what they call the Old Testament and what they call the New Testament, when the fact of the matter is, these things are just not true. both of these documents, our Hebrew Bible, our Tanakh, and their New Testament, contain both angry statements and loving statements, boring statements and peaceful statements. I mean, Jesus said, I come not to bring peace, but to bring the sword. And Jesus said, if someone doesn't love their mother, and if someone doesn't hate their mother or their father, they don't love me. And there's all these other things. Again, they can be interpreted in different ways. And he got angry and he tossed over the money changers, and he had some pretty strong mussar for the Pharisees and all these things. And whatever you want to say, it's still not really true. So, and then of course you do have those statements of love, and God is love, and all these things. I mean, you have both. In both, you can find legalism in what Christians call the New Testament, and that's part of the reason why Luther wanted to remove certain passages and books, wanted to remove the book of James and so forth, and because he thought they were too legalistic, and certain things in Paul's epistles, are certainly giving, instructions and so forth of how to conduct a church and how the hierarchy should be, and all these other things, and how people should treat each other, that they could be interpreted legalistically. They're not necessarily interpreted like that now. It goes back to something I've mentioned many times, that the story with these secular Bible scholars debating what is the Bible's view on this or that, and then the elder among them, they were out drinking, and the elder among them, out of a drunken stupor, he gets up and he says, the Bible is pure energy. None of these things are true. None of these things are the opinion of the Bible. The Bible is pure energy, meaning that you just talk about the Bible, you can find so many different interpretations, and the question is, which interpretation is right? And that's why you have so many different denominations of Christianity and different movements within Judaism and so forth. And there have always been these different movements, both within Torah and outside of Torah, who understand things differently, and who see things differently. And you cannot say that this is the Bible's opinion on too many things. There are certain things, God exists. God is one. There are certain obvious things, but even those things are unable to be understood without a guidance of a tradition. And everybody has a tradition. I don't care how much you want to claim that you are quote-unquote sola scriptura, that you only follow the Bible. All you do when you claim that is just accept a different tradition than another tradition. You're only replacing one man-made tradition or one tradition of men for another, no matter what. You could never say that you follow only the scripture, particularly if you're not familiar with the original tongues, and if you haven't read them in the original tongues. And I don't know Greek, so I have not read the books that Christians call New Testament in Greek, but I have read them in English. But I have read through the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, in the original language. I'm almost done doing it the second time, meaning most of the books I've read many times. Several books I've read many times. The Flemish I've read, but like Chronicles, I only read. This is only the second time in my life that I read through the whole book of Chronicles. I'm working on it, and I'm part of the way through Second Chronicles. But it's like that's a book we don't really read that much. So I'm happy that I had an opportunity to read it again, because it's been, 15 years since more than that, 17 years? Since I was 16, 17 years since I read through the whole Bible, and I was like, I should really do this every year, but alright, I mean, like we do with the Chumash, and whatever. Alright, it's not time to talk about that. But that's the point. If you want to say you're quote-unquote sola scriptura, you're fooling yourself. There's no such thing as sola scriptura. Everyone who claims to be sola scriptura, who claims that they're only following the Bible, are really just following some tradition. Time and time again, because it's mostly Protestants who have this sola scriptura mentality, but you also have Jewish heresies like the Karaites, and there used to be the Sadducees and so forth. But none of them were really, the Karaites are certainly not sola scriptura. They certainly have their traditions, and they just trade one tradition for another. That's what they do. But it's the same thing with the Protestants, with all due respect to the Protestants. And they probably deserve more respect than the Karaites. But when the Protestants say they follow sola scriptura, but then they'll go tell this whole story about how Lucifer fell from heaven and how he was, the greatest of all the angels, and he rebelled against God, and all of these stories all these legends about Satan and Lucifer and this and that are not in the Bible, meaning they can cite passages that they believe hint to these ideas, but they're really still no different than our Midrashim, except that our Midrashim are our tradition and those are their traditions, and they're very different traditions, and we don't have these traditions about Lucifer, about so much of what Christendom believes about Satan, it's not in the Bible. It comes from Dante, it comes from Greek mythology, it comes from everywhere but the Bible. And they're just the traditions of men and not the Word of God. And the same things with the Trinity and with all these things. These are traditions of men. These are not the Bible. But there's something else that I really want to bring out here. I discussed before about the differences between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and how I'm pretty sure that most of the people that, if at all books are true, which I would doubt, but whatever sources, whatever truth is in them, for the most part, Jesus was fighting much more against the Sadducees than against the Pharisees. And also, who are the Pharisees? That should really be a whole different video about who are the Pharisees. What is this term Pharisee? What is it all about? But anyway, so why does he say all these words against the Pharisees? It's because he knows they want to do what's right, and he thinks they might listen. As opposed to the Sadducees, he knows they are a lost cause. That's how I would read it, personally, and I could be wrong, but historically and so forth, it makes sense to be that way. Again, this is just my interpretation. I'm saying this is true. But, for example, I've said many times before in other videos, this whole story with the he was without sin cast the first stone and that stuff. Almost certainly, if that's a true story, which I doubt, those were Sadducees. And who were the ones who brought Jesus to the Romans and so forth? Those are definitely Sadducees, because the majority of priests were Sadducees. They had their own Sanhedrin, which was different than the Sanhedrin, just because it uses the same name. It's a Greek word, it's not a Hebrew word. So it doesn't mean it's the same Sanhedrin. Meaning the Great Court of Jerusalem, which was the rabbinical court, there was the priestly court, which was different. And they also, because they mostly spoke Greek, they also called it a Sanhedrin, And the high priest was almost certainly a Sadducee. There's no doubt. Most of the high priests at that time were Sadducees. That's just history. And those Sadducees were all total sellouts to Rome. And yet, most Christians will feel that they have more in common with the Sadducees than with the Pharisees, because the Sadducees, especially Protestants, will feel that way because they're like, the Sadducees are sola scriptura, but nobody's really sola scriptura. That's just a fact. I mean, maybe there are some people, but for the most part, everybody, all these different Protestant denominations are just following the traditions and the interpretations of their teachers and the founders of their denomination for the most part. But then you'll have people who are like, well, I'm non-denominational. But the thing is, you're still following somebody. You still have some pastor that, you look up to be an authoritative interpreter and expositor of Scripture. In some sense. And for the most part, the vast majority of Protestants still are accepting certain Catholic doctrines like the Trinity and so forth. I mean, that's neither here nor there. But it's a free country; they could do that, and they've done so many beautiful things that I still have tremendous respect for them, and I believe that their religion is a major reason why they've done all these things. But I want to put something else on the table here. I remember, I think when I first started at the hospital where I'm a chaplain, one of the patients, he said to me, or maybe it was in the prison where I was a chaplain, I don't remember. I think it was here at the hospital. He said, "Oh, I love the Old Testament, an eye for an eye." So I said, the rabbis explain that an eye for an eye doesn't mean you're poking out people's eyes. It means it's talking about money. That because your eye is not worth the same as the other guy's eye, so it means that much and no more. I mean, you have to find out how much money this guy's eye was worth, meaning how much money is he losing because now he can't do the same job that he had before because he only has one eye, and you got to pay him that. And that's what it means, an eye for an eye. It doesn't mean you're poking out someone else's eye, because what do you gain by that? You don't gain anything by poking out the other guy's eye. You're only gaining by, and the guy, you're not getting your eye back, So that's what it means, eye for eye. I said it means money. It doesn't mean poking out other people's eyes. So the guy's like, "Oh, you Jews, everything's about money, isn't it?" But I don't know. I thought that was hilarious. I don't know. What do you want? People poking each other's eyes out? But that's what the Sadducees would have done, but not what the Pharisees did. And so, in reality, having some kind of tradition usually tempers us, meaning, and that's perhaps why people have this vision of the quote-unquote Old Testament, what Christians call Old Testament, being so harsh. It's because you don't have the interpretations of the rabbis to temper it. And it sounds pretty scary if you take it at face value. If you live a sola scriptura existence, you're going to wind up with ISIS, or Taliban, You're not going to wind up with a society that you can live with. And that's really the lesson that we have here. And that's what I really want to bring out with this idea, is to show that, it's the same thing like the rabbis say, when it says a number of 40 lashes, it means the number just before 40 lashes, When you're counting, when you just get before it, meaning so it's 39 lashes, and it's not 40 lashes. And so the rabbis are taking off pain because it's one less lash. And if you would just have the Bible without the rabbis, you'd have 40 lashes. And that's a great example for everything, meaning life is so much more livable. And Judaism is a living religion. It's not this dead religion that Houston Smith thinks it is. It's a living, breathing religion only because we have a living, breathing Torah that exists by virtue of the rabbis, which the whole authority of the rabbis was established in the Torah in this week's parsha, where it says you should listen to the teachings of the judges who live in your day, and you shouldn't deviate from which they teach to the left or to the right. That's where the rabbis, I don't mean guys like me, I don't mean any rabbi today, really, but I mean the high court that existed in Jerusalem in ancient times had the authority to establish law that was binding on everybody, whereas opposed to local rabbis only have authority in their own local community, and only by virtue of things that are within the realm of Torah and within the realm of what the rabbis have established, meaning they can't go and switch the Sabbath to Sunday. They have no authority to do that. Nobody has authority to do that. And nobody ever did that. To be honest, Christians don't believe Sunday to be the Sabbath because they don't believe in the Sabbath. They believe Sunday to be the Lord's Day and a day of assembly and prayer and church, but not a Sabbath, really. Some have interpreted it to being a Sabbath. Later on, it developed into that. But that's not really what it was supposed to be originally. When Christianity, adopted Sunday as a special day, it was not meant to be adopted as a Sabbath. Specifically because, probably because Akum Sheshavas Chayv Misa, it's probably related to that. And it's ironic how many things that rabbis say push are so Pauline in nature. That's neither here nor there. It's not time for us to discuss that. But the main point I want to bring out is that really you can find love and peace and all of these things in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the Tanakh, in what Christians call the Old Testament. There is the God of love in there as well. But the thing is, the only way to make it practical and livable is to have some kind of tradition that makes it so. We believe that our tradition is divine and based in God's commandments. There could be arguments that it was somehow a human construct, but there's still divinity in there. And there certainly are certain traditions that are godly. So, alright, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment, and I'd love to continue the discussion. God bless.